Listen to me. This is not about us. Please, don't do it. Quantum power!
Do you guys just put the word quantum in front of everything?
Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to The Grid. I'm Joel, aka LeBlur Grammar, and with Antman and the Wasp Quantumania being released this week or this weekend, we need to spend some time talking about all the small details around Antman and everything that he's done inside the MCU before we start talking about Kang and the quantum realm and everything that's going to happen inside of Quantumania. So sit on down, let's grab some popcorn, and let's get right into it. Blur the abridgments, blur, blur the abridgments, blur the abridgments, blur, blur the abridgments. So my goal with this video is to recap everything that happened with Ant-Man and the Wasp, particularly as it pertains to the quantum realm, specifically with Kang and all the things that we possibly lead up to inside the quantum realm and how this sets up the multiverse saga going forward. And everything starts with the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym. So before we actually start talking about Hank Pym inside the MCU, we need to spend some time talking about who he is inside the comics. First, in the comics, specifically in the Golden Age comics, Hank is one of the founding members of the original Avengers. He also originally has a different wife than we see inside the MCU, Maria, which he then takes a liking to Janet because she looks like Maria. Staying within this vein in terms of the comics and how we're relating that all to the MCU, inside the comics, Scott Lang's arc is very similar to the one that we see inside the MCU. But again, the reason why I'm highlighting that is because Hank's is slightly different than what it is inside of the MCU. And that backstory actually gives us a little bit more credence to who he is as a scientist, as a person, and as a father going forward. And understanding that information helps us understand who he is as a father, husband, scientist, and all those other things that all those other hats that he wears inside the MCU. But they don't really talk too much about his backstory inside the MCU because they focus more on Scott. Hank is the original creator of the Pym particle. This comes because of the fact that he discovers quantum particles, and that allows him to shrink the size between atoms. All right, so I need you to follow me here. So, in 1945, Cap goes into the ice, and basically what that also means, Erskine is now dead, so Super Soldier Serum is null and void, and Red Guardian, or at least at this point, is the only person, or technically the only person, that could have Super Soldier Serum somewhere inside of the MCU, but we don't necessarily know if he actually uses it or has the opportunity to use it with S.H.I.E.L.D. because they don't explain that. He goes somewhere off into the distance, somewhere in a far distant country in Russia. But in 1960, we also then get the discovery of Pym particles, which to me looks like a ploy or a reach from S.H.I.E.L.D. looking for a way to infiltrate into enemy lines without being seen, and that leads into Hank Pym discovering Pym particles at that point. So moving forward, but that's basically where we get Ant-Man from and all the things that happened inside the 60s. So let's move on. With that though, a little bit of backstory on Ant-Man and what he can actually do. Basically, when he's compressed or when he is inside of his ant-like form, he has the strength of multiple tons and can pick up and destroy literal humans off GP, if you want to call it that. But anyway, the energy that he has is completely compressed. He's basically like a bullet coming out of a gun if he was coming at you full speed.
Small energy is compressed, so you have the force of a 200-pound man behind a fist 1/100th of an inch wide. You're like a bullet.
Hank Pym also discovers how to communicate with ants through EMP telecommunications.
Magnetic waves to stimulate their olfactory nerve center.
In Universe MCU, Hank meets Janet in the 1960s and starts a family. In the MCU, Janet Van Dyne is also similar to Maria in this case because Maria also passes away. And in so, Janet also does the same when she goes into, or at least the way that Hank looks at it, she's passed away or has now died because she has gone into the quantum realm and cannot be recovered. Janet is also a brilliant scientist in her own right, so when they come together, they basically form a power couple of scientists. In 1987, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends Hank on a mission to take down a missile heading to the United States, and along he brings Janet with him. When they reach the missile, it is already in the air or basically being launched as they are preparing to disable it. What Hank understands that he is going to need to do is go subatomic and then destroy it that way. But when he tries to do so, his regulator is not working, but Janet comes up behind him and hers actually is. So she tells him to tell Hope that she loves her, and she basically knows what she has to do. He does too, but he doesn't want it to happen. She does disarm the missile, but continues to go subatomic, and at that point is not recoverable, or at least Hank doesn't have the technology understood enough to bring her back. So when he returns back home, that is his only mission and the main thing that he drives his life on, basically also pushing Hope away as well.
She was gone. And I spent the next 10 years trying to learn all I could.
So let's explain what the quantum realm actually is a little bit. The quantum realm is a tiny universe that is available or accessed based through Earth 616 that we've seen inside the MCU. In the comics, it will be known as a microverse, which is basically a dimension that can be reached from Earth or from the Earth dimension using Pym particles. But there are 3 ways to get inside of the quantum realm: going subatomic, using Pym particles, magic, or using a quantum tunnel. And historically, entering the quantum realm has been easier than actually leaving the quantum realm, unless you have proper tech or something calling to you from the outside world. And within the quantum realm, there are levels upon levels upon levels too. So the deeper that you go, the smaller that you become, and the harder it is to bring you back. A point of revisitation here, the reason why Hank is completely obsessed around bringing Janet back is because he doesn't understand the tech completely, and at that same point, like I said earlier, he is driving Hope farther away from him as well. That's a key point to understand going into Quantumania in terms of how Ant-Man as a father, both Hank Pym and Scott Lang, are perceived by their daughters. In 1989, wonderful year, Jordan hit the shot.
At the buzzer, Michael Jordan has...
I was born.
Go, 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 shorty. It's your birthday.
And at the same time, Hank Pym was being bamboozled by S.H.I.E.L.D. when they were trying to steal his Pym particles.
Tell me that isn't what I think it is.
And when he finds out that they are trying to steal his Pym particle, he quit
If only you'd protected Janet with such ferocity, Dr. Pym.
and smashes the head of the guy from Hydra. Thank you, because I hated that guy. Fast forward to 2015. And in this year, we meet Scott Lang, who is an electrical engineer by trade because he has a degree in it.
Got a master's in electrical engineering, all right?
And gets a job at a security company named VistaCorp. But he then understands that VistaCorp is stealing from their customers and decides to steal from them, giving it back to the customers, but is then caught. So in the beginning of Ant-Man 1, that is where we actually pick up with Scott inside of his storyline, basically coming from prison or 3 years after his sentence. This is also in the time period of his daughter being born, and at the time, this is 3 years away from Cassie. This is one of the key things to remember going into Quantumania, because this basically is the main driving point, at least from what we've seen inside the trailers, that he is trying to gain time back, or Kang is dangling that in front of him as the carrot that is going to help Kang get what he wants in the end. Scott then gets a job after being released from prison at Baskin-Robbins. They then find out that he lied on his application because
Baskin-Robbins always finds out, bro.
no job, no child support going to Cassie, meaning that he cannot see, again, losing time with Cassie, he cannot see his daughter at all. And it doesn't help that his ex-wife is now married to a cop, which basically makes everything 10 times harder because he follows everything by the book. He invites himself to Cassie's birthday party. She's happy to see him, but he can't be there because he hasn't paid child support in ages. Again, like I said, the guy on the other side is a cop. He knows exactly what he's talking about. So he kicks him out of his house. That then leads Scott to go on a new job with the crew. He teams up with Luis the storyteller, Dave T.I. Tip Harris the getaway driver, and the hacker with the fake Russian accent.
You seen Soul?
Inside of a old dumpy house is a old guy that is just rich beyond belief, and we could basically break in there and steal whatever he has behind this big vault. Unbeknownst to them though, Hank Pym is that old guy behind the big vault, and he's been watching them the whole time.
I was very impressed with how you managed to get past my security system.
Were you watching me?
Scott, I've been watching you for a while.
I always feel like somebody's watching me.
Scott then realizes that the thing that was behind this whole big vault that Luis was talking about was just a suit. He then puts it on and is almost trampled by platform shoes inside of a rave in a house party.
Right. Keep the suit. I'll be in touch.
Scott then tries to return the suit, but is then caught. So the reason why Hank needs Scott to break into Pym Technologies, his old building in the first place, is because his mentee has now gone crazy or rogue at this point and has created or tried to create his own version of Pym particles, but is not doing it very well. In the same process, he's trying to create it, then sell it to people like Hydra and the Ten Ring. Hank gets wind of this because Hope now works at Pym Technologies. But again, I need to back up and give some more backstory to who Cross actually is. Aaron Cross is his full name, and he is the old mentee of Hank Pym. He develops his own suit called the Yellow Jacket, but it doesn't necessarily work the same way that the Antman suit does. Fun fact about the Yellow Jacket suit here, it is also in the comics, at least inside the golden age of comics, it is also one of the personas that Hank Pym also has as well. Cross's particles, however, are far more unstable than Pym's particles though, so he goes completely crazy. Hank then hires Scott to fully infiltrate and steal the Yellow Jacket suit. While Scott goes through his Ant-Man basic training, Hope then has to confront her dad because at this point it is the main driving force or the wedge between them, the fact that she doesn't have a suit. He has now given the suit to Scott and doesn't want to lose Hope in the same way that he lost Janet.
To protect you. Lost your mother. I didn't mean to lose you, too.
And this is where the main storyline for at least this movie, and again what I believe is going to go into Quantumania later on, the driving force of time, one, but fatherhood is the main overarching thing that we are seeing inside of Ant-Man as a whole. It paints the picture that quality time with their daughters are missed because of outside forces that they couldn't even control, or they tried to control but couldn't control themselves, and then had to deal with the consequences of that time being lost. So again, going into the theater, you want to keep in mind that this is really all about fatherhood and time. The crux of this particular point happens when Hank has a heart-to-heart conversation with Scott.
Scott, I believe that everyone deserves a shot at redemption. If you can help me, I promise I can help you be with your daughter again.
Inside of the going well portion of his training, Hope then starts to fall for him after seeing that he is actually a snack.
Nailed it!
And following this wonderful training, he is then put into the deep end when thrown or being told that he is going to a warehouse, or an old warehouse, which is what Hank thought it was. But when he rolls up and pulls up on the warehouse, he finds out that it is actually Avengers compound. He then fights Falcon, wins, and steals the device that he was trying to come there for in the first place. Scott brings his crew to help with his mission, and up until this point, everything is going well. Plan is going exactly how it's supposed to. Everything is peachy keen until it's not. Cross knew about this the entire time. It was Aaron Cross all along, and really wants to sell the Yellow Jacket suit now, but the A Squad stops him, blows up the building, or blows up Pym Technologies building, and it goes somewhere.
I don't understand.
And at the very end of the movie, we learn that Falcon, Sam, at this point, is looking for Ant-Man because of what he just did to him. So I said all that to say, this is what leads us into Civil War when Cap brings Ant-Man along after the Sokovia Accords have been issued. Wanda has now created a conflict with the rest of the Avengers after blowing up a building inside of Africa, specifically around the area of
Wakanda. Wakanda.
From this, we get the Sokovia Accords, where some of the Avengers, Team Iron Man, go with everything as it is planned, and others, Team Cap, don't. We then are introduced for the first time inside the MCU to Zemo, who comes from the Sokovia area. He now frames Bucky Barnes and destroys or blows up a UN meeting, also killing the then king of Wakanda, King T'Chaka. Steve and Sam now are fugitives when they help Bucky go on the run, and they need a way to get out of Germany, so Sam calls Scott. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where we get the famous airport battle that I have been using as a backwards time clip all the time, but this is where we get that illustrious airport battle from inside of Civil War, which is by the way one of the best inside of the MCU I've ever seen to date. A fun fact here, Giant Man is first seen inside of this particular variation of fighting scenes, and this is also another one of the many versions or personas that Hank Pym inside of the comics, Golden Age comics specifically, takes on. But this battle allows Cap and Bucky to escape from the airport and leave Germany at that point, and everyone else on Team Cap is then arrested and placed on the raft. Then
I'll be there.
Cap comes to the raft and rescues everyone. They then go on the run for some, except for Hawkeye and Ant-Man, because they have families and they made agreements to stay home.
You don't turn your back on family.
Scott is now placed under house arrest, and this is where we transition from Civil War into Ant-Man and the Wasp. Scott, as mentioned, is now on house arrest.
Now they done stop me and I get locked up. They won't let me out. They won't let me.
2 years after Civil War that he has been on house arrest. So inside of the entirety of Ant-Man and the Wasp, this 3-day period that he is leading out is the lasting portion of his house arrest.
Oh, hey guys.
In this time, he has to become very creative in the time that he spends with his daughter on the weekends.
I learned that.
While taking a bath, he then encounters the memory dream that Janet placed inside of his brain in the ending of Ant-Man 1. What he sees is Janet, literally, and he is playing Janet at this point, and also a younger version of Hope. The way that this is framed inside of the movie makes me believe that this is where dream walking has its origin from inside the MCU, basically, or the thought of dream walking comes from in terms of magic and all of that kind of stuff. We don't necessarily have that in space just yet, but it looks that way, that is where the idea of dream walking has come from. It comes specifically from the quantum realm because, again, as we said before, the only ways to get to the quantum realm are through Pym particles, Pym technology, or a tunnel at this point, or magic.
All right to me. You think you know how the world works?
After having this dream, he then calls to Hank and Hope, who do not answer his call because of what happened in Germany, and
they hate his guts.
Thanks, Peanut.
And they are now on the run as well because of his events. They are basically infuriated over him, I should say, because literally he said that he destroyed the suit, but that is not exactly the case. Hope is also mad at him because she didn't even get an invite to go to Germany. I mean, if you're gonna go to Germany, fam, you gotta bring your lady with you.
I know.
So because she didn't get
Food out,
he's in the hot seat, completely on trial here because she didn't even get a call, text, or smoke signal.
You go down there to Baltimore and have big fun, Vanessa. Tell me, didn't you go for big fun?
Mom.
Shut up!
Hank and Hope are now traveling inside of a van with a portable office or lab, as it were, and that's pretty much the thing that gets tossed around the entire movie. The reason why is because inside of that lab, there is a quantum tunnel used to find Janet based on the fact that Scott has now come back from the quantum realm. We also then find out that the dream that Scott had was possibly triggered by the fact that the quantum tunnel is being used by Hank and Hope to find Janet in the first place. So in the same time that they open the portal, she is able to communicate with Scott because of the communication or entanglement that she has created through his mind inside of the quantum realm when she entangles with him quantumly inside of Ant-Man 1. To build the quantum realm tunnel in order to get the part for it, they enlist the services of a underground black market dealer, Sonny Birch, who then finds out about the quantum realm tech that they are building and wants in on it for himself. And though he's not the main villain for everything that's going on inside of this story, he does show up multiple times inside of the film. However, the main villain for this story is Ava Starr, otherwise known as Ghost. So the backstory on Ava is she was exposed to a lot, and I mean a lot, of quantum energy when she was a child, based because of her father, Elias Starr, was also working with Hank Pym, and he then tried to make his own quantum tunnel. Due to the fact that she ingested a lot of quantum energy in the explosion, she now is phasing in and out of reality, as it were, literally going through buildings and other people. What? Ava learns about the tech that they are building, and they meaning Hank and Hope, and she wants to grab hold of it so that she can cure her own illness. Again, the illness that came from the explosion with Elias, that is literally taking her body, morphing it apart, and then stitching it back together second by second, minute by minute, every single day, and it is painful. Ghost is now trying to grab the powers or grab energy from Janet because pure quantum energy is the only way to stop phasing from happening. If she doesn't get it, basically what's going to happen is she's going to phase completely out of existence. She's trying to grab energy from Janet Van Dyne as she experiences it through the quantum realm. As Hank and Janet are leaving the quantum realm, we also get our first look at Chronopolis, which is the city of Kang inside of the quantum realm. Janet has the ability to help Ava to understand her powers and to help her completely stop phasing. Everything works out. Scott is off house arrest now and can be a real dad, and now has a real chance at dating Hope again. Then at this point, we pretty much already know what happened with the snap. At the same time, this is when Scott is going into the quantum realm, which is because of a van quantum tunnel that they have makeshift created on the top of a roof at this point. And the A squad, or the A team is what I want to like to call them, is basically going into the quantum realm to gain access to more quantum energy for Ava to be able to cure her. And Scott is left inside of the quantum realm. For him, that's 5 hours. For us, that would be 5 years. A rat now activates the quantum tunnel and allows Scott to escape. And again, most importantly here, Cassie is now a teenager, meaning that Scott has now lost more time with his daughter. If you're counting at this point of the video, that is 10 years that Scott has now missed with Cassie. And again, that is 3 years inside of jail, 2 years being house arrested, and 5 years being inside of the quantum realm. But in this time, or in this period of time, he does theorize that we can use the quantum realm to go back in time, grab hold of the Infinity Stones, and actually save the universe.
Time travel!
He pitches his situation to the Avengers, they bite, and they all go on the time heist after. However, this doesn't work the exact same way that it does in things like Back to the Future.
I don't know why everyone believes that, but that isn't true.
Because what happens when you go into a timeline, it literally branches off and doesn't just become your future. It literally is a different part of the timeline that happens when you do that. Every time that something like that was to happen, literally it is a different pathway inside of the timeline. So to sum all of that up, you cannot change the past. You can only branch into another part of the timeline. To add to this, the quantum realm could possibly be a gateway into the multiverse, and if that is the case, there is a lot of things that could happen inside of that mainly because it's completely unstable. So Tony builds a new quantum realm tunnel. They go through it, and you know what happens after that. 2014 comes through that tunnel, and the big battle in the Endgame saga, the aftermath of Endgame, was actually pretty good to Scott. He becomes a celebrity, writes a book, is on a podcast, specifically the podcast for This Powered Life, in an episode dedicated to him. And my friends, we have now reached the point, basically without return at this point. We are now heading straight into Quantumania. All right,
let's get dangerous.
But first, before we go into all of the things that can happen inside of Quantumania, let's address who Kang actually is before we get into all of the things that he could do inside of the quantum realm. In the 31st century, a young scientist named Nathaniel Richards goes exploring through the multiverse. At the time of his exploration, it was just a bunch of universes stacked on top of each other. Nate then starts exploring and meets variants of himself. Some were good and some were not as good as they should have been. The MCU doesn't necessarily say what those variants have in terms of names, but we can infer from the comics that probably some of those were Ramatut, Nathaniel Richards again, and also the big bad of all of them, which is probably where the intent of everything, or the tipping point of everything, happened, is Kang, because he is the big bad of everything in terms of Nathaniel Richards' variants.
Some of us, new worlds meant only one thing: new lands to be conquered.
And when you come into contact with a Kang the Conqueror variant, every single one of them has the same arc. They all want to conquer the multiverse because they look at it as a thing of time that can be conquered over and over and over again. So they wage a multiversal war against all of the other versions of Kang the Conqueror, which then leads us into one main version, at least inside the MCU.
He who remains
curates the entirety of the timeline using the fractured variant timeline eating thing called Elias. He then prunes or gets rid of all of the other variants inside of the multiverse, leaving with just one singularity of a timeline that he has now curated and made his own. Inside of this timeline, we get the isolation of Earth 616, which in universe, inside the MCU and also inside of the comics, is the main Earth that we know, that we are looking at and seeing inside of the movies that we have come to love and understand so far. But inside the comics, there are a bunch of multiple different Earths around and inside of the Marvel lore. So everything in terms of the multiverse basically can hinge or go in that direction as well. Currently, though, we are just looking at a singular timeline given to us by He Who Remains. But a key thing to understand is there are no other timelines while the sacred one is going on. Though the sacred timeline exists, it does branch off from time to time. And when this branching off thing starts to happen, it is known as a nexus event. So there are beings inside of the MCU also called nexus beings, which means that they can cross different times or jump from timeline to timeline. And at present, the only two that we know of are Wanda Maximoff, Scarlet Witch in this case, and Kang. Again, a nexus event is a branching off from the sacred timeline. From that sacred timeline branch, we then get a different or a variant timeline branching inside of the sacred timeline, which is where we get the TVA from in this case. And the reason why we need the TVA is because when those nexus events happen, that is literally a dangerous event because, again, as I explained earlier, literally it could cause a rift that could bring Kang again. And if that happens, it is a multiversal war waiting to happen over and over and over again. So the TVA is now created and is only there to stop branches from happening inside of the timeline and to prune beings that believe or have caused basically time treason against the timeline. So all the events that happen inside of Endgame, going through the timeline and looking for Infinity Stones, all of those branches have now been pruned, at least if that is the thing that we are holding true for the entirety of the TVA. pruned folks, when they are pruned, are sent to a place inside of the timeline called the Void, which is basically where Elias takes hold of them and eliminates them from existence. When you meet this Void area, and if you meet or come in contact with Elias at any point, it is He Who Remains has at this point been ruling the timeline for a very long time. And that then leads us into the catalyst event that happens at the end or inside of Endgame.
Where's Loki?
And when he does that, he encounters the TVA. His encounter with the TVA is basically where we come into contact with everything that happens inside of the series of Loki. More specifically, this is also where we can possibly pinpoint where the TVA might be. Maybe it's in the quantum realm, but we never actually get that figured out yet. But we also can see that when Loki goes through the timeline and hits the Citadel at the end of time, they then come into contact with He Who Remains, and He Who Remains gives them an ultimatum, which is where Sylvie decides that she doesn't want to go that route and chooses violence, and instead killing him and starting this whole thing over. Okay, so at this point, we've covered everything that you need to understand inside of the or going into the theater before actually watching Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. But again, just to recap, understand these 2 points if you understand nothing else. One, the main thing that you really need to understand is that this entire saga, or the Ant-Man saga as we know it, is built on the fact of fatherhood and time, which is exactly what I believe, or what I'm theorizing, that Kang is going to play on top of multiple times inside of the Quantumania movie. Also, second thing, Kang is literally available to jump from multiple different places inside of the timeline. So we may see him do that inside of Quantumania, or we might even get other variants inside of Quantumania referenced somewhere inside the movie. So keep a lookout for stuff like that. Well, that's pretty much it. I'm about to go get ready to watch the movie this weekend, and if you haven't already, go grab your tickets, because I'm about to be in the theater. Hope to see you there. Blurred out.